It's just the second day of the new year, but problems are mounting for Benjamin Netanyahu. 2023 was the worst year, perhaps, for the Israeli Prime Minister. And by the looks of it, 2024 may not be better. Today, Israel's Supreme Court struck down the Judicial Overhaul law, a controversial law that Netanyahu raced to pass, a law that triggered the biggest protest in Israel's history. The court has struck it down. Without it, his political allies may dump him. His international allies are also wary of him. They want the war to end. Meanwhile, survivors of the Supernova Music Festival are suing Israeli forces. They accuse them of negligence. And the citizens of his country want him out. An opinion poll says that if elections were held today, Netanyahu's Likud party would get only 16 seats. Usually, wartime leaders are popular, but not Prime Minister Netanyahu. Our next report tells you why.
Ladies and gentlemen, to our region, to the
Last
entire
year,
world,
Benjamin Netanyahu was riding a high at the 78th UNGA meet.
here's Israel,
He came armed with a map,
of peace and prosperity.
talked about the birth of a new West Asia. He boasted about peace, about relations with the Arab world. But 2 weeks later, his new West Asia plans went up in flames. On October 7th, Hamas attacked Israel. And 88 days later, Netanyahu's troubles only keep mounting. If a war wasn't setback enough, today the Israeli Prime Minister was handed another one, this time a legal setback. His Judicial Overhaul law was struck down. It was already highly disputed. The law was part of a judicial overhaul proposed by Netanyahu and his government. It was about greater control of courts. It was met with widespread protests. Thousands protested against it every day for months. But Netanyahu's government passed it anyway. But now the Supreme Court has rejected it, calling it a threat to Israel's democracy. So that's strike number one. But it wasn't the only one today. 42 survivors of the Nova massacre have sued the defense establishment. On October 7th, they were at an open-air music festival. It was happening in the Negev desert, just 5 kilometers away from the Israel-Gaza border. The music festival was one of Hamas's first targets. These survivors say it should have never been allowed. They argue that if there was intel about a potential attack, permission should have never been given, especially that close to the Gaza border. So they are suing everyone, from the Israeli Defense Forces to the police. They want $56 million in damages. Now, for a prime minister who's made a career out of being a security hawk, being sued for intelligence failure doesn't sound great. But Netanyahu's problems don't end there. We may have entered a new year, but it's the same old war in Gaza. Nearly 22,000 people have died in the Strip. 70% of Gaza's homes are destroyed. Netanyahu says he won't stop until Hamas is wiped out. But his allies have a bigger question. What happens after Hamas is destroyed? What is the end game? Who will govern Gaza? So far, Netanyahu has evaded these questions. Support for Israel's war in Gaza is waning, especially on the international front. Support for Netanyahu is also dwindling, especially at home. Wartime leaders are usually quite popular. Take George W. Bush, for example. During 9/11, his approval rating was at 90%. But Netanyahu is seeing so much bump. In fact, he's only losing support. A recent opinion poll suggests that if the elections were held today, Netanyahu's Likud would only get 16 seats. Currently, the party holds 32 seats. Plus, there are calls for him to resign. 70% of Israelis want him out, and the opposition agrees. He may be leading the wartime cabinet, but leaders think Israel would do better if Netanyahu sat out. Netanyahu is Israel's longest-serving leader. This is his 6th term as Prime Minister. He's always had the knack of making political comebacks, of surviving what others could not. Many call him a cat with 9 lives. But has Netanyahu now exhausted all of them?